Okay, Kamar, we are live.
All right. Good evening. Welcome to all of those who have joined us on the CPIM Facebook page. This is the page of the CPIM Central Committee, and today we are going to be speaking about the different kinds of oppression that women face. As you know, the subject that has been given to all of you, which has been publicized, is Women Resist Class, Patriarchy, and Religious Fundamentalism. And today we will be speaking about all these different aspects. First, I would like to introduce my colleagues here. I myself am Subhashini Ali. I'm a member of the Politburo of the CPIM. And with me are Comrade Hemlata, Central Committee member and the President of the CITU, and Mariam Dhavle, also a Central Committee member and the General Secretary of the All India Democratic Women's Association. So we will be speaking from our experience also in the women's movement of the different kinds of oppression and exploitation that women face. I would just like to add one thing, that these three kinds of oppression, of course, are common to women all over the world. Class oppression, patriarchy, and the role that religious fundamentalism plays in depriving them of their rights. But in our own country, we have a social system which is quite unique in the world, which is the caste system, Varnashram Dharma, and that is something that is based on birth-based inequality, and it promotes inequality. It's a kind of inequality that you cannot escape from. And this caste-based inequality underpins and reinforces all the other kinds of oppression and exploitation that women face. It makes class oppression even more severe. It increases the class exploitation of women, especially those who come from the so-called lower sections of society. It reinforces patriarchy in very different ways because of the kinds of codes that it sets down for women, and also women across castes by by reinforcing and depriving women, all women, of their rights, like a right to choose their own life partners outside of their caste community or whatever is supposed to be permissible for them. So, in this way, the caste system, the existence of the caste system, definitely plays a role in reinforcing, as I said, class oppression, in making patriarchy even stronger, depriving women of their rights, and also it is very it's a very integral part of the religious fundamentalism promoted by the majority community, by those who claim to represent the majority community in our country. It's a very big part of Hindu religious fundamentalism. So, just with those opening remarks, I'm now going to invite my colleagues to speak. I'll first ask Comrade Hemlata. She's going to, of course, speak about the class exploitation and oppression of women, and also what is very important, how women are resisting. So I will ask her to speak first on this very important subject.
Thank you, Comrade Subhashini, and dear friends. As the subject indicates, how do women resist the class, patriarchal, and also the oppression of the religious fundamentalism today? So I'll be basically concentrating on the class. The other aspects my colleagues will speak on. But when we talk about the class exploitation, women who are working, whether they are working in industry or agriculture or any other, either peasants or agricultural workers, they all face class exploitation by the employers, whether they are the capitalists or the landlords. And in addition to that, they also face social oppression because of the prevalent patriarchal values in our society even today, and also, as Comrade Subhashini has told, the caste oppression. The caste oppression It is the agricultural workers, the Dalit agricultural workers. Large number of Dalit women are working as agricultural workers, and similarly the fishers. The fisher women, large number of them are from Dalit communities or the socially backward communities. And similarly, the Safai Karmacharis, the sweepers and the municipal workers who are engaged in cleaning the drains and Safai work, all of them, they face exploitation by the employers, and they also face the patriarchal oppression from their families in the society, and also the oppression because they are Dalits. So this type of oppression is common among the working women, particularly those who are in the unorganized sector. Working women, large number of them are in the unorganized sector, in the lower rungs of the work, that is, which is low paid or which is so-called unskilled. It is not actually unskilled. I don't think it is all unskilled, what the women do, the so-called unskilled work, but it is called unskilled, so they can be paid less. So it is as the domestic workers, or it is as the agricultural workers, it is as the sweepers, it is as the other sections of the low paid workers, where the women are engaged in large number. So this is one, the class exploitation and the social oppression which the women have to resist as working women. In whichever sector they are working, they have to resist both the class exploitation, they have to oppose it, fight against it, and also they have to resist social oppression, patriarchy, and the caste system, which is oppressive caste system. So what we find as working women who are working in the industry or agriculture, first thing, I'm mainly concentrating on women who are working in the industry or the services. First thing is the discrimination, starting from the point of recruitment. Women are discriminated even in terms of recruitment, even in the modern industries. In the special economic zones, there are certain restrictions that women from 18 to 25, those who are unmarried, who are young, they are only eligible to apply. In many factories or many establishments, women above a certain age, they are not allowed to even apply, or they are not recruited. So that starts at that. And then the discrimination in the wages. We all know India is one of the countries where women, the discrimination in the wages, the wage gap is very high. And again, it is not only in the unorganized sector, even in the organized sector. That is the jobs that women are given. They are categorized separately, they are designated separately, and that particular designation carries lower wages. So that type of discrimination exists even in the organized sector. And then in terms of training, in terms of promotion, so at all stages of their working life, women face discrimination and of course sexual harassment, which is widely prevalent everywhere in organized, starting from the IAS officers level up to the agricultural workers level, everywhere that is prevalent. That is one type of issue, one type of problem, which is a very big problem that the women face today. And other thing, which a serious thing, is that the work women do is not at all recognized as work. Most of the work is unrecognized. And for example, the women who are collecting the fuel for the family and collecting the fodder or cooking or taking care of the children in the household work, taking care of the children, taking care of the sick or the old, all these works, all these jobs are totally unrecognized. They're not works at all. Even women don't recognize these jobs as work. When we ask how, those who are the homemakers or those who stay and do all these type of work at the home, they themselves say that I don't do any work. So, and this situation is being utilized. The non-recognition, it is not, doesn't count on the GDP. It is not recognized, or it is not counted in the GDP also. While women do 2/3 of the work in the entire world, actually their work is not at all recognized. So that is one of the major issues, that the work is not recognized. And another thing is, even if it is recognized as work, it is undervalued and underpaid or unpaid. So this underpayment, because it is not recognized, when you come out, and women are made mainly to do the same work as they are doing in the house, cleaning the house, cleaning the roads, or cleaning the establishments or the workplaces. So looking after the children in the Anganwadi centers, or feeding the children in the schools, midday meal workers, looking after the health in the family, taking care of the sick, then taking care of the community, health of the community, the ASHA workers or the nurses or such jobs. So it is mostly this type of work, and you find women in these types of works only. When you go up the ladder, very few women are found. So the total number of nurses are women, number of doctors as women doctors is less, and women in the administrative positions is even less. So this type of thing, because their work is not valued, their payment is also very less. And this is being utilized. That is the patriarchal values in the society, the feudal values in the society, which are prevalent widely even today. Even with the development of capitalism, these values are still prevailing in our country. So this type of attitude, that women's role is to bear children, it is to protect the family values, it is to protect the honor of the family, honor of the community. All these are the responsibility of the women. And if she goes beyond any of this, then she is punished. So this type of thing is taken, utilized by the capitalist society. It is utilized by the employers, and it is also utilized by the government. It is utilized by the employers, as I said, to deny them equality, equal wages and equal opportunities in promotion, etc., etc. And what is even more reprehensible is that the governments who are elected by the people, they also treat women, utilize this attitude to treat women in the same manner. So otherwise there is no reason. We have today around 60 to 70 lakhs or even more women workers, mostly, who are working in the central government departments. And also, in addition to this, several lakhs are working in the state government departments as working to implement the schemes of the central government. We have not actually counted the number of women who are working in implementing the various schemes of the state governments, different state governments. They also have their own schemes. But when it comes to the central government, in the Women and Child Development Ministry, they have this ICDS program, Integrated Child Development Services Program, which has been implemented, which is there since 1975. It is around 45 years. And many women have been working, all the Anganwadi workers and helpers who are actually implementing the ICDS scheme at the ground level, at the village level, at the mohalla level, all of them are women. The Anganwadi workers and the helpers, there are around 26 lakhs, more than 26 lakh women who are working, and many of them are working since the last 2 decades. Some of them have worked 3 decades and 35 years, and the government asked them to stop working without giving any retirement benefits. But none of them is recognized as a worker. So all of them are social workers. They are paid a remuneration which is very meager. I'm not going into all the details. And what is their job? They are actually developing the future of our country. They are developing children. The main job is to develop the children below 6 years. And this is the phase where most of the children, around 85 to 90% of the child's brain develops. And they have to create interest about education among them. They have to provide nutrition. They have to teach them about the normal activities. So, and in the Meanwhile, they have also to identify if the child is properly developing or not, and if it is not developing, they have to refer to the hospital. So it's a very big responsibility, developing the future, but they are not treated as workers and they have no benefit. Similarly, the ASHAs. Around 10 lakh, more than 10 lakh women are working as accredited social health activists. They are not even workers or social workers. They are only activists. They are not even paid an honorarium. What they are paid is an incentive. And that is a piece rate. That is, you do this one, this much incentive will be provided. You do that work, that much incentive will be provided. And on the whole, they got very low remuneration. And during this period, particularly during this COVID period, it is they who are going house to house trying to identify patients, their positive cases, trying to identify their contacts, and teaching the people to observe the norms, etc., etc. So they are not supposed to be workers. They are supposed not to have any working hours. So they are only given incentives. But it is they who are actually doing this job, working almost 24 hours a day. But then no extra payment, no extra remuneration. Nothing. Similarly, the midday meal workers, they are not paid even for the entire year. Because schools are closed for 2 months, they are paid only for 10 months, and that is as meager as 1,000 or 2,000 rupees per month. So this is the type of jobs. The main thing is that it is the government of India which is calling them. They all agree that they need to be paid wages, they need to be recognized as workers. The ILC has recommended, but even today that is not implemented. So what I want to say is that this is part of non-recognition of work and undervaluation of work, despite their contribution to the development of the society and development of the country. So this is what I say is that against this type of lack of benefits or attacks on their rights or non-recognition of their demands, etc., etc., the situation, women are coming to fight in large numbers. How do women resist? Women are today coming in large numbers to fight. They are forming unions. What actually is that even where the central trade unions are not there, even where the central trade unions or other organizations have not made any effort to organize them, as workers, because it is an inherent character of the working class to come together to fight on their demands. So they are coming together, they are forming some independent unions or some other union, and they are raising the issues and they are fighting. And they are fighting very militantly in many places. Even today, if we see that Anganwadi workers, Ashas, and also the plantation workers, the BD workers, the municipal workers in several states, despite the COVID situation, even earlier also they were fighting, but despite this situation of lockdown, where it is not possible to come out to protest in large numbers, even then they are coming out onto the streets and fighting. That we see in different states. In Haryana, the Ashas have been in strike since more than a month, and they have a joint duty only on the assurance of the Chief Minister that they will arrange a meeting, a proper meeting to address their demands. Similarly, the Anganwadi workers. And another thing is that there are so many cases against them. If a woman has to come out to work in a trade union, because today, as I told, in the patriarchal society, women is supposed to be working in the home. Because of the economic reasons, because she has to earn some income, women are coming out and joining some work. For that, the family has no objection mostly. But if she indulges in organizing work, then most of the families will not agree, because joining the union, going onto the street, shouting slogans, and getting involved in cases, going to the police stations, they are all not supposed to be the job of a woman. There is a lot of opposition from the families, from the husband. So when a woman has to resist against this attacks on her livelihood and on her income, on her job, etc., she has to first convince her husband, convince her mother-in-law, or convince her brothers, her parents. If she is unmarried, the entire family, only then can she come out. And so this is not only a fighting against an employer or an enemy, but within the family, within the community, within the society also, she has to convince and come out. And the third point is that she has to be accepted within the unions also. It is not easy for the unions today in the male-dominated society, and the trade unions are to be considered as some male preserves. So large number of trade union leaders are men. So the party has been trying to bring more and more women into the trade union movement, into the Kisan movement, into the party. But this is the problem that women have to face. So that also women are facing today. And they are coming, as I told, in not only leading their own unions, not only as passive participants, that some leader or some decision is taken and you come and join. It is just not like that. They are doing that. But in addition to that, large number of women are taking the initiative to lead the union at the ground level, many, and also at the district level, at the state level, and the national level, where there are some opportunities, there is some encouragement. It is not the women that they hesitate. So women want to work, women are ready to work, and it is not easy for women to work also. We have large number of, we see large number of women activists who have to fulfill her domestic tasks in the family, cook for the family, and then come out for the job, and after the job join the trade union activities. So it's a triple burden. But even then women are ready to do that. And that is the question. Why are women doing this? Large number, there is a general tendency, that is an attitude that no, women don't come. I think that again is a patriarchal attitude. That is, women need to be protected. How can women come sit in a dharna in the hot sun? It is so cold. How can women come and sit there? So it is also a patriarchal attitude that women need to be protected. That is one extreme. And the other extreme is that they are not allowed. So both these attitudes, they prevent women from coming and playing the due role in the society, the development of the society, in resisting the anti-people policies, anti-worker policies, anti-peasant policies, anti-national policies. But still then, large number of women, they are able to convince their families, they are able to even convince and prove their abilities to the male leadership, and they are coming out and joining the trade union movement and leading the trade union. I think this is an inherent interest in women, in which they see these struggles as a sense of liberation, that they can come out from oppression within the family. They can come out and they can express themselves, they can fight, they get recognition. Once they mobilize people and fight for their causes, they get recognition. And this is all also as any human. It is not specific to women or specific to men. Generally, for any human being, it is their inherent values, their inherent character, their abilities, their capacities, they have to be recognized, and they also have an inherent desire to fight against the patriarchal values. So they feel that coming out is also their way of fighting the patriarchal values, and also fighting the caste oppression, and also fighting the class oppression. So I think all these things, three things are together. So when women fight, resist, and when women fight against the class exploitation, they also want to fight the patriarchal attitude prevalent in the society, and also the caste system. So what I think is, this has to be recognized. this interest of women to do this has to be recognized. It should not be suppressed. Women's, as the government is doing or the system is doing, that women's work is not recognized. Women's abilities also should not go unnoticed or unrecognized. So all the progressive forces and the progressive thinking parties and our cadres, they have to recognize the abilities and the capacities of women. They have to encourage them, they have to educate them, they have to raise their consciousness so that they can fight as part of the broader struggle to change this society, change this exploitative society, change the caste oppression. As today, peasants are also coming. Today, probably the peasant organizations, the Kisan Coordination Committee is going to give a call for a very big resistance program on 25th of September. So I hope women also will join that. So women as workers, women peasants come together as part of the entire struggle for against oppression, for the change of the policies. I think there is a possibility of developing a broader platform of struggle, of resistance, of defiance, and move forward for establishment of people democracy and socialism, exploitation-free society, which is the ultimate objective of our party. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Comrade Hemlata. You made some very interesting, of course, you had a lot to say about the women who are working in the unions, and that was very inspiring. But you made some comments which I would just like to react to. One was, you said, even though capitalism is developing, but mindsets are not changing, patriarchy is not getting weakened, feudal ideas are still so prevalent. I think that what many of us feel is that though there might be a development of capitalism in our country, but it takes advantage of earlier oppressive and exploitative systems to actually intensify exploitation. And that is why, after the promise of the the new liberal reforms that we were going to enter a new era of modernization, what we have found is that the neoliberal era was actually an era which is of intensified exploitation and intensified inequalities. And that is why we are finding that actually in many, many spheres, women and all the most exploited sections, men, all the most backward caste people, Dalits, actually their conditions of life and livelihood are becoming even worse, deteriorating even more, because the neoliberal framework, which is based on intensified exploitation and intensified inequalities, actually ensures that all these different kinds of inequalities become more and more unequal. And your experience and your what you told us about the scheme workers especially really illustrates this point, along with the fact, of course, that women do this huge amount of unpaid labor, which they have done through the ages, but which in today's society is absolutely necessary for actually keeping the capitalist system alive. If the women's unpaid labor was not there, then it would mean that the system would have to take on many of the responsibilities for which the women are working and taking on free of charge. So these are some, I think, interesting points that we can discuss and others can discuss when we talk about the whole situation of the exploitation and the different kinds of exploitation that women are exposed to. And now, of course, I will come to Comrade Mariam Dhavle. She is the General Secretary of the biggest women's organization in our country, and she will have many experiences to share with us, experiences of oppression and also experiences of resistance and struggle. Yes, Comrade Mariam.
Thank you, Comrade Subhashini, Comrade Hemlata, and all those who are watching us today. Women resist class, patriarchy, and religious fundamentalism. This is a very relevant topic that we are discussing here, especially in the background of the difficult times when there is an all-round onslaught on the lives of women. Today, women have to contend with these issues and problems arising out of these different aspects. These and many more, of course, as already Subhashini has added regarding the caste exploitation. The pandemic we have seen has intensified the exploitation and attacks on the hard-earned rights by the women's movement. Now, in India, when we are talking about the issues arising from these three aspects, one has to keep in mind that today we have a government that is rabidly pro-corporate, it's regressive, it's authoritarian, and very fascistic in nature. Now, the changes that are being forcibly implemented, we are seeing the way the government is resorting to change the entire structure that exists in our country today and implementing these changes with regards to land, work, food, education, health, criminal laws, every other aspect. And this is going to hit women very, very severely. Now, if you take in the situation regarding the agricultural sector, actually there's a report by Oxfam. And
Mariam, your voice is breaking. Your voice is breaking and you're not very clear. I just asked the.
Okay.
Yeah, now you're all right. Now it's all right. Now it's all right.
Yeah. So, as I was saying, we don't really need reports because our ground level experience tells us that. But 80% of the work, agricultural farm work, is done by women. And the land owned by them is less than 13%. Similarly, we find that whenever land is inherited, there is a report by the Human Development Survey. There is a Human Development Survey 2018 which says 83% of agriculture.
You are only.
Yeah. I'm just seeing some.
I know.
Anyway. Yeah. So, you know, the agricultural land is inherited by males. Women hardly inherit any agricultural land. And because of that, they are left out of all entitlements, rural credit or assets or access to any inputs, everything. Then we also find the agricultural labor. A large part of it is women. More than 42 to 45% of them are women. Now, when the agricultural bills are being pushed through by this government and they're trying to facilitate the role of private players, encourage corporatization of the agricultural sector, what is going to happen to the women farmers? As AIDWA, we have been taking up these issues. We are finding a lot of families where the farmer has committed suicide. The issue of women within that family, none of them get entitlements, and that's because basically they are not recognized as farmers even though their contribution is very large. They do not have their names on the land, so they are not there for compensation. Similarly, we find even in the tribal areas, you see during the forest rights struggle, after the law has been passed, but the struggle is still going on. And a large part, as Comrade Hemlata has rightly said, that women form a very, very large part of these struggles. And why is that? Is because they realize that land going away from their hands, even though it is not registered in their names, will lead to massive starvation of their families. And in this forest rights land, we remember as AIDWA, when we took up the campaign of filling up the forms, because the forms had to be filled up in both the names. But when the issue came up of single women, of widowed women, deserted women, separated women, you will be surprised that in our country, many of the collectors or tehsildars didn't ever have a concept of women-headed households. In fact, when AIDWA took this up, they started asking their lower down officials, what is this new category, women-headed households? We've never heard of such a thing. And then we had to explain to them how women should also fill independently forms where they do not have any male members. So these struggles are going to be very adversely affected with the entire takeover of the land, and women are going to face further destitution. Similarly, when working in the areas, rural areas, now we have seen what is the situation, the whole unemployment scenario. So ADWA has been taking up the struggles for, especially for food and for work. Now, where you find food, it is a well-known fact that when there's less food in the family, it is the woman who eats last and eats the least. Sometimes doesn't eat anything, just survives on water and something like that. It's because she just doesn't have the food. And now, in spite of all the tall claims of the government, the reality is that people are not getting food. ADWA has taken up a struggle in these areas. What have we found? That because of the linkages that the government wants to do with the Aadhaar and all these things, there are a large number of poor women beneficiaries who have been left out. Why? Is because, for example, women who are widowed or women who are deserted, they do not have the ration cards. The ration cards are with their husband's family, and they are not getting any alternative identity cards also. So many of them, it's only through struggles that women have been able to avail of this facility. But this is not looked upon separately as a category, because women do not exist as a separate independent category in government records. So they have to have a ration card where the husband's name is there, her own name. Now they are saying women's name will going to be first and all this, but it's very difficult to avail of these cards. And that is why the food struggles and the struggle for work. Now you see there is a massive demand for work in the rural areas. The Manrega work is being carried out, but because of the huge demand for work, the supply being limited, most of the areas, one person per family is being called. It means what? One person per family means the male member. Here again, not just the male members, ADWA has taken up struggle in some places. What happens? Male members in some areas are there. Some of them get the money, but that money does not reach homes. We all know where it reaches. So, and that is why many times we've had to take struggles to say that the women from these families must get work. That is one. And second, where they are single women, they must get work. But along with that, a very interesting thing happens in Manrega and in many other places we have seen. They say, Jodi se aana chahiye, Jodi bankar aana chahiye. When Jodi means couples should come. अब जोड़ी बन के आएंगे तो क्या होगा? इसमें पुरुष का जो है उसका वेतन उसमें कैलकुलेट होगा, और औरत का जो वेतन है वो वेतन सिर्फ जोड़ के वेतन माना जाएगा. Means she has done enough and more work, maybe more carrying of that load of that mud and all this, but her labor is not calculated separately. And this is another aspect in Manrega where we find women's labor is very, very devalued. Now, why this happens is, you see, at every step, be it food, be it work, be it any kind of rights, we have to contend with patriarchal ideologies at every step. Now, work, without work, anybody, ये आत्मनिर्भर की बात करते हैं, लेकिन आर्थिक स्वातंत्र के बिना कोई भी आत्मनिर्भर नहीं हो सकता है. अब अनऑर्गेनाइज सेक्टर की बात हेमलता जी ने की, बराबर है, ये अनऑर्गेनाइज सेक्टर में औरतें बहुत बड़े पैमाने पे काम कर रही है. अभी सरकार इज प्रोपोगेटिंग दिस स्टे एट होम एंड वर्क फ्रॉम होम. नाउ वर्क फ्रॉम होम मीन्स व्हाट? इट ओनली मीन्स work from home with the patriarchal division of labor in the domestic sphere. It has caused unimaginable increase in the woman's workload, domestic workload, and has also impacted very adversely on their health. अब ये तो कहीं नहीं देखा गया है, and the government is trying to play up as if work from home, flexible time, where women can handle both responsibilities. ये patriarchal पितृसत्ता जो आइडियोलॉजी है वो इस तरह से काम करती है जैसे बड़ी मेहरबानी कर रही है, औरतों को सक्षम बना रही है अपनी सब जिम्मेदारी को निभाने के लिए, इस तरह से. So work from home means the women can also then take care of their unpaid labor and at the same time earn some money, as if this kind of, a very rosy picture they are trying to project, which is highly misleading and extremely devious. Now, jobs are less. Even in the labor laws which they are changing, the 12-hour work that they're talking about, jobs are less, working hours are more. How are women going to cope? So many women are going to, will be forced to leave work, to leave productive work, to be a part of the economic system because of this pressure of very high hours of work. This is right. Women are never recognized as workers. Even to get the right of domestic workers to be recognized as worker was a very big struggle. Along with the trade union movement, the women's movement also had to raise this demand continuously. Even now, in many areas where AIDWA is working, there are some construction women workers. The construction women workers here also, jodi se kaam karna padega is the thing. And they are not recognized. They do not get separate identity cards. And that is why they do not get the benefit also of all the schemes which are there. In many places, the single women are left out from that. And that is why right to work as a fundamental right has to be reinforced again and again, not just as chalo ek kamgar hai, but as a woman, as a equal citizen of this country, this right has to be reinforced. But now what we are seeing is the patriarchal Manuvadi ideologies. They are reinforcing the anti-women doctrine of women being as unequal, subordinate human beings. ये हर जगह पर उनका प्रचार चल रहा है और हर जगह पर ये बार बार नीचे तबके तक बोल रहे हैं कि औरतों की जिम्मेदारियां क्या है। अरे भाई, औरतों की जिम्मेदारी औरतों को बताने की जरूरत नहीं है। आप समझिए आपकी जिम्मेदारी क्या है औरतों के प्रति, ये तो वो नहीं समझते हैं। Now the self-help group women in this situation, what is happening to them? Women are borrowing money left and right. Left and right, they are borrowing to somehow manage the homes because they are not having the money. And because of that, indebtedness is also increasing. अब where corporate sector के बड़े-बड़े लोन ये माफ कर रहे हैं, ये बेशर्मी की हद है कि ये सरकार सेल्फ हेल्प ग्रुप की बेचारी गरीब औरतों को के पास से उनके जो एनपीएस, उन्होंने एनपीएस आया है और ये कितना है, उन्होंने जो लोन लिया है, it is just about 2% of all the entire loans that the self-help group women have taken, and they have issued a circular to the state rural livelihood missions that immediately collect all the outstanding loans of the self-help groups. AIDWA, jointly with all other women's organizations, have sent protest letters to the rural ministry, including the labor minister, that you should in fact give out and write out the pre-pandemic loans of the
Mariam, Mariam, your voice is breaking.
Yeah.
I think you have to keep up good position.
Is it?
Now it's all right.
Okay.
Like
okay.
this.
So, okay. Right. So, the government should actually write off the pre-pandemic loans and give collateral-free and interest-free loans to the SHGs now to overcome the crisis. Also start the urban employment guarantee scheme, because in the city areas there is no work whatsoever. Domestic workers are in the most critical situation today. They have no work. They are getting beaten also at home. This is the situation.
The voice is breaking.
Now I don't know what to do.
You have to
Comrade, maybe you can switch off your camera.
I don't know.
No, now it's all right.
Okay.
Comrade, you can switch off your camera and then be on the audio.
Okay. So, let me see now. Let me see if it cracks. What should I do?
Just switch off your camera and be on the audio.
Switch off your camera.
Right.
Yeah.
I'll do that once.
Yes.
Okay. Is it better now? Yeah. So the government is actually ignoring the life and livelihood problems of women. And along with this, we are facing the tremendous increase in violence. Domestic violence, yes. But at the same time, we are finding in our country an 86-year-old grandmother to a 9-month-old baby is being raped. And conviction rates are still low. Nobody is being held accountable. bad investigations, not just bad investigations, the entire structure in our country, is not conducive to helping the victim of violence. The honor killings that we have seen, the upper caste arrogance that is today being exhibited. And that is why, unfortunately, why is all this happening? We are finding that the corporate sector is allying with conservative forces and creating a dangerous situation for women in our country. We have people in power today. We have a party in power whose leaders always talk of teaching a lesson. Now, in this teaching a lesson is also women. If women do not conform to their ideology, to their way of how women should lead their lives, then they will be taught a lesson. And that's why you find there is an aggressive resurgence of patriarchy and regressive propaganda, which is clearly seen in the campaign carried out by the RSS in the bastis and in the villages. Irrational and unscientific ideas are being propagated. Women have, women are, in this corona thing, where they have, what do you call, they have prepared one corona mai, and it's a woman again who is an evil woman and who is going to create disaster. And they are telling women in the ground level. Now you imagine a woman worker, a woman farmer, along with being class exploitation. Along with that, she is being told that you are not following the traditions of the country. You are, आप अपना महिला होने का धर्म नहीं निभा रही हो, इसलिए ये पूरी बीमारियां आ रही है. So the poor women have to told to do the pujas, to have bath in the river, and to keep quiet and not ask their right to live as decent human beings. The glorification of anti-women practices. Now you see, it's also linked to the market. The linkage of the market to these rituals is very interesting. And that is also what is happening. The changes in the textbook, the whole dowry system being, sort of glorified, glorification of all these kind of anti-women practices, especially all these what Karwa Chauth types, where women have to, see the husband's face, etc. But you link it with the market. So the sale of gold, the sale of new clothes, along with that. So the woman is being totally mesmerized. Now you see even this in Navratra happening in every sphere. You are finding that these things are being propagated. The women's movement have continuously fought against exploitation, inequality, oppression, and violence. It is through these struggles that rights were achieved. Now, during pandemic, before pandemic, and even after pandemic, the women are definitely going to resist all attempts to overturn all these hard-earned rights, because now there is a real threat of reversal of these rights today, because the state itself is working towards the reversal of these rights. On one hand, allying with the corporate sector, but on the other hand, enforcing its own Manuvadi ideology. The culture of othering, you see the others, the othering. So you target the minorities, the Dalits, the tribals, and the women. And gender rights, gender is used to deny the rights of workers and farmers, you see. So that is why appropriation of a woman worker's labor by devaluing her labor because of her gender is still one of the major issues that the women's movement is confronting. Similarly, the undervaluing of the labor of a woman agricultural labor is well known. And that is why equal pay for equal work, etc., are the struggles that the EDWA and women's movement take up at the ground level, along with all of fraternal organizations, sometimes even independently. There are reports, you see, very, very heart-wrenching reports of women having to remove their wombs so that they can continue doing their work, so that they're not removed from work. Now, this is a gender aspect, and this is also a class issue. So the gender and class merge, and that is why it is extremely important that these aspects also have to be looked into when we are struggling against class exploitation, along, because the gender exploitation, appropriation of gender labor to enhance profits also becomes a part of that. The patriarchal structure today and the class exploitation is fully backed by the Sangh Parivar and the Modi BJP government, which is going to increase in the coming days. And that is why, friends, the fight for equal rights for everybody, as our Indian constitution gives us, along with that, it becomes extremely important to fight for the rights or equal rights of men and women. Thousands of women have participated. You see, in these recent struggles, on June 1st, we had protest. On August 28th, more than 1 lakh women came out on the roads. 5th September, thousands and thousands protested all over the country. So, and as you see in Gurgaon, there was a domestic worker protest organized jointly by the ADWA and the CITU. And one of the women over there was asked by the press that why is it that you have come? She had a very simple answer to give. She said, as a woman, my life is at stake. My life is at stake. I cannot continue to remain a bystander. This is what her answer was. So she identified herself as a domestic worker along with being a woman citizen of this country. So these are the issues that ADWA has been taking up continuously, and we are sure that as the struggle goes further and how this government is reacting, in fact, it is extremely dismal that it had to say in the parliament that it doesn't have figures for the dead migrant labor and for the dead health workers and doctors. It is shocking, and that is why independent India needs to come out on the roads. And we congratulate the youth actually, for because there were thousands of young girls involved on 17th of September, which made it an unemployment day in the country. So all of us together will have to come forward. There is no other way. With this, I end my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mariam. Of course, a lot of experience coming from struggles organized by ADWA along with other organizations and on its own. And also the last 6 months studying very closely the conditions of women, members of migrant families, women who are themselves migrant workers, women who are demanding work in Manrega. We saw that before the return of the migrants, actually women in the villages were getting more work. But when the migrants came back, then the males were given preference and the women had to lose their work. So these are issues that ADWA is so closely associated with, along with the battle for food, for rations, and so many others, and of course the ongoing never-ending fight against violence. And one of the very important points that you raised, and maybe if we have time, we can discuss it at length a little later, because it actually is part of what all three of us are talking about, and that is how the market is actually working to reinforce patriarchy. Now, one would have thought that the market is an independent, neutral part of society, but of course it isn't, because the market is governed by the search for profits, and patriarchy increases profit making, because patriarchy keeps such a large section of the workforce under control and willing to work for lesser wages or forced to work for lesser wages. both in the countryside and in the cities, that obviously that's a direct relationship between profit making and patriarchy, between increased inequality and patriarchy. But it's actually even more than that, because if you remember, and Hemlata would be interested also, that ADWA conducted this survey a few years ago about just when we had 10 years of neoliberal reforms. That means at the end of the 1990s, we conducted this dowry survey, if you remember, and very interesting things came out, that actually the practice of giving and taking of dowry had increased exponentially along with the neoliberal reforms. Because the neoliberal reforms, the market increasing the inequality between men and women, meant that a woman at the time of marriage, the expenses of the woman's family was so much greater, the dowry demands were so much greater, and so on and so forth. And how the market also worked through advertising, through promotion of particular rituals and particular observances, to keep this imbalance growing. The imbalance between the status of women and the status of men meant that more and more and more would have to be spent at the time of a woman or a girl's marriage by her family in order to see that she got married at all, or that some happiness was ensured for her, and so on and so forth. So this link between class exploitation, the market, patriarchy, and also the caste system, these are all, I think, uh, all matters that need more discussion and more clarity, and they need to be made known much more to those who are actually suffering the exploitation, those who are suffering the inequality, and those who are struggling, as you said, like that woman who said, if I don't struggle, I'm not going to live, so I cannot be a bystander anymore. These linkages between these different aspects of exploitation need to be made much more clear. And therefore, I'm coming now to the final third aspect of women's oppression, and that is religious fundamentalism. Now, we all know that all religions across the board, they are they do not promote the equality of women with men. All of them, to some extent, some less, some more, uh, reinforce the belief that women are inferior to men, and inferior physically, and inferior in every other way, and therefore a woman should not be given equal rights with men. This is something that across the board we can see people take offense, but they can look at it a little more seriously, that all religions, or we can say the way in which religions are practiced, but all of them, in the way they are practiced, in the way that their reality is made known, they do discriminate against women, they do discriminate against women's rights, and they do deprive women of equal rights. And therefore, as the hold of religion, in fact, becomes less in a society that is secular and fighting against obscurantist beliefs, fighting for equal rights, fighting for equal rights of citizenship, keeping the religious and the public spheres separate, the more that happens in a society, we have seen it in our own country, the more the possibility of women accessing equal rights increases. For example, the Constitution may promise us equal rights, and it does. But actually accessing those equal rights for women means that, as we have seen, a battle on so many fronts has to be waged. And one big battle has to be waged against religious beliefs, against religious traditions which militate against equal rights. We saw that at the time of the Constituent Assembly itself, when the question of the Hindu Code Bill was being discussed, we found that actually equal rights for women were being opposed in the name of religion. They were being opposed in the name of religious belief. They were being opposed in the name of religious tradition. That is something that we Indian women should never forget. That the first battle that was fought for our rights by Dr. Ambedkar and others was actually opposed tooth and nail, and it was opposed not because anybody said that women are genetically inferior to men, or they are physically inferior to men, but in the name of religion, religious belief, and religious tradition. So that is something that is very important for us to remember, because today, what are we seeing? For 70 years, we were hoping that we would be able to make our society more secular, that we would be able to enact or fight for the enactment of more and more secular laws that will ensure equality to women of all communities. For example, the law against sexual harassment in the workplace. It applies to all women, irrespective of religion. Even if some religion says that an employer can beat his employee or whatever, but that cannot happen because that law, a strong secular law, was passed. Similarly, the law against domestic violence, we have all fought for it, and it was passed. It is also a secular law. It applies to women across communities, of all communities. Nobody can take the plea that my religion allows a husband to beat his wife or mistreat his wife or whatever. That cannot be a plea anymore, because that law has been passed. It's a secular law which affects women of all societies. And so we see very clearly that the strengthening of secular society, the strengthening of the belief that religion should be a private affair, it should be kept out of the public sphere, actually allows women to access their rights, allows women to fight for more and more rights, and their rights are usually or most often trampled upon in the name of tradition, especially religious tradition. This is something I think that we have to keep on and on emphasizing in all our, whenever we have meetings, whenever we are mobilizing, whenever we are preparing for a struggle. These facts have to, I think, also be made known, especially today when there is an attack on secularism, a huge attack on secularism. Now, here I'd just like to say something that, as far as religious fundamentalism is concerned, it is uh, mostly associated with those religions which are organized religions, which have a holy book, which have a structure, which have certain easily identifiable laws or leaders. So it is always said that religious fundamentalism means going back to the basics, going back to the basics of a religion. So I think that we have to widen and broaden that understanding of religious fundamentalism. What I think we should emphasize is religious fundamentalism is actually a way of using religious beliefs to keep inequality alive, inequality of women and inequality of other sections of people also, to deprive people of their rights. And I think in the Indian context, it's very important to remember that what is, even though we have always talked about the shortcomings of our constitution, earlier on we know that the right to property was also a fundamental right, and there was, that was opposed. And of course, many of the things that the constitution promises us, promises all its citizens, has not been implemented because of the class structure of society, the class nature of the state, which always promotes inequality in its own way, even while it pays lip service to the secular constitution, but still, it does deprive people who are poor, women, Dalits, minorities of their rights, because its first priority is to uphold the class system and the system of class oppression. Its first priority is to defend the interests of the capitalist ruling classes, which is why we have seen that the promises made in the constitution also have not been fulfilled in 70 years. And all the things that we are talking about, these are not only problems faced by us today or in the last 6 years, but these are problems that have been faced by women over, the last over decades after independence also. But today, what I would like to say is that we are facing a completely new attack. Now, people say that an unorganized religion or an unorganized belief system, like the belief system of the majority of Indians, which is called Hinduism, there cannot be fundamentalism, because it cannot go back to some purer situation. It doesn't have all those other elements that other religions have. But I think that this is a spurious argument. What we're actually talking about is the separation of the religious private sphere from the public sphere of citizenship and access to rights. And here, when we look at it in that way, then we can certainly see that there's a very, very concerted effort today by those who are ruling the country and ruling many states. And this is an effort that they do not try to hide. This is a mission on which they have embarked very openly. And that mission is what? That mission is actually to get rid of the secular democratic constitution that was passed in 1950. Now, I'm saying this in all seriousness because it's not we of the left who accuse the RSS of this. The RSS itself accepted way back in 1950 that it does not believe in the constitution. It does not respect the constitution. It does not accept the constitution of India, because the leaders of the RSS at that time, Guru Golwalkar and others, they said very clearly that this is a constitution that is imposed. It has got nothing to do with our own belief system. It has nothing to do with our own traditions. It has got nothing to do with our own religious beliefs. It militates against all these things, and that's why we do not accept it. And what were they proposing? And that's why I'm saying, when we talk about religious fundamentalism and the majority community in our country, we have to remember that it was the RSS that said way back in 1950 that we want to bring Manusmriti as the law of the land. The law of the land should be based on Manusmriti, because Manusmriti is our most sacred Dharam Shastra and Nyay Shastra. Dharam Shastra and Nyay Shastra, we understand, it is both a system of a legal system and also a religious system. So they said right then in 1950 that the Manusmriti is the basis of both our laws and also of our religious beliefs. And that is why we should try to replace the constitution that has been passed with a Nyay Shastra and a Dharam Shastra that is based on the Manusmriti. So therefore, to say that religious fundamentalism cannot be applied in that sense to what those who consider themselves to be the leaders of the majority community are trying to do, that is completely erroneous. We have to accept and we have to understand that they are very, very serious about taking away all that we have actually gained from the national movement and from independence. And they want to take it away in the name of religious and traditional legal shastras, matlab classics. So this is something that we have to be very clear about. And then we have to understand that what is Manusmriti? Manusmriti was now more and more researchers have come to the conclusion that it was a compilation. It was a compilation and bringing together of many streams of thought which justified inequality at birth, what we call Varna Ashram Dharma. This Varna Ashram Dharma was being propagated by so many different texts, so many different shastras, so many different scriptures. And according to the latest research that is now being done by Sanskrit scholars, after probably in the 1st or 2nd century AD, when actually Varnashram Dharma was facing very, very big challenges and had been facing very big challenges for some centuries, by systems of thought like Buddhism and Jainism, which did not believe at all in inequality at birth or birth-based inequality, birth-based choice of profession, etc., etc. So there was a concerted effort to meet this challenge by actually codifying the Manusmriti from many, many texts and many shastras which existed and put it all together in one sort of one book, which, let me tell you, is considered a holy book of Hindus. And anybody who says that it is not is actually trying to obfuscate, because this has been done not by anything that I'm saying, but those who claim to be the leaders and the believers and those committed to actually creating a system of governance in this country, which will be based on Manusmriti and which will be some kind of a Hindu Rashtra, is what we are being told. Now, here it's very important to understand that what does Manusmriti actually promote? I'll try to be brief. Manusmriti promotes a social system based on complete inequality and several grades of inequality. First of all, it is an inequality from which there is no escape because it is based on birth. Secondly, it is an inequality in which different laws apply to different people belonging to different castes. So there are people from a higher caste, if they murder somebody of a lower caste, then the punishment will be different. But if somebody from a lower caste murders somebody of an upper caste, then the punishment will be also completely different. Now, people say that this cannot happen. But actually, if we see what's been happening the last 6 years in our country, certainly people are being condemned in different ways depending on which religion they subscribe to, which caste they belong to, whether they support the government or whether they oppose the government. This is becoming more and more clear with each and every passing day. I just want to tell you that recently the government of Uttar Pradesh released some statistics in which they said that out of the about 400 cases of NSA, that is National Security Act, that had been applied in 400 cases, more than half had been applied against those accused of cow slaughter. So we know now who are the people who are being accused of cow slaughter. So this is one way in which we can see already, when the constitution is supposedly still there and sacred, how different the laws are being applied and implemented in different ways because of who you are, or as our Prime Minister says, the clothes that you're wearing, because you can be identified by that. So this is just one example of how already the subversion of our secular constitution, which is actually the greatest guarantor of equal rights of women. It is only in the constitution, in the history of our country, it was for the first time in the constitution that women were considered equal citizens. Up till then, in the history of our country, this has not happened. Women were never considered equal citizens till the Constitution of India was passed. And along with women, people belonging to the minorities, people belonging to all sections of society were all given equal citizenship. So, in spite of all the shortcomings that the Constitution may suffer from, we have to remember and have to realize and have to propagate that it is actually the only guarantor of equal rights for women in our society. And if it is completely subverted, then the fight to regain many rights that we will lose and also try to access many rights that we still need to access will become even more difficult. I don't say impossible. Nothing is impossible. You cannot deny justice to any group of people forever. There will be a revolt, there will be resistance, but it will be much more difficult. So therefore, as I see it, in our country, one very important aspect of religious fundamentalism, which of course has been dependent on so-called tradition, so-called rituals, so-called beliefs to keep women as second-class citizens, to deprive them of their equal status. We've been seeing this even before the BJP was in power. But the same value system, the same system of what we call parampara, tradition, was used even then. If we take up the issue of honor crimes, and I think that ADWA has played an absolutely pioneering role and an extremely courageous role in this whole fight against crimes of honor and the Khap Panchayats and all of that. But what was it based on? Why do ordinary people find it necessary to kill their own children? It is their very deep rooted belief in the caste system and their very deep rooted Manovadi belief that it is the woman who is the repository of caste purity. She is the guarantor of caste purity. And if she crosses a caste boundary, especially if she crosses a caste boundary and goes lower down in the social hierarchy when she marries, then she endangers the entire caste system, not just endangers the honor of her family, but endangers the entire caste system. And that's why Manusmriti also says that she should be killed or given all kinds of horrible, subjected to the worst kind of torture imaginable. And this belief, which is still there in the DNA of our people, then inspires them to commit unspeakable crimes against their own children, against their own relatives. So there's already a very strong, what should I say? There's a very fertile soil that already exists in our society for the subversion of our constitution to take place and for more and more Manuvadi laws and interpretation of laws and also implementation of laws to take place. So this is something that certainly is going to impact very, very severely on the whole issue of women's rights and women's exploitation. But I would like to say that also we find that even though women are very often very susceptible to the ideas that religious fundamentalists preach, but they are also in the forefront of battles against religious fundamentalism. And here I would like to just take a few examples from our very recent history. I'm not going back to Shah Bano and all of that. But if we see even our recent history, it is a very important fact that it was 3 young Muslim women actually who approached the Supreme Court to declare triple talaq as illegal, to make triple talaq illegal. It was not the government of India or it was not Narendra Modi who did it. It was 3 young Muslim women who approached the Supreme Court, and it was the Supreme Court who agreed and actually said that this practice, this way of giving divorce is now illegal. It cannot be resorted to in our country. And then the BJP, of course, made political capital out of it. That's another story. But it was women who came out against this very strongly held belief. There's no doubt about it. It is a very strongly held belief that this way of giving divorce is perfectly within the ambit of Islamic Sharia. Many people say it is not, but I'm just saying it's a widely held belief. Similarly, not many people know this, but we have a very small community of Boras in our country where genital mutilation is actually still practiced. And I must say it is amazingly courageous of women in the Bora community to have started the fight against this barbaric system, which again is justified in the name of some religious beliefs. It's a very difficult fight that they've undertaken. Mariam knows all about it. And they are confronting their own parents, their grandparents, their families. And they have managed to get a lot of support. Most unfortunately, when the Supreme Court was going to give a final hearing on this issue, the government of India, I want to tell you, Narendra Modi's government approach the court to give more time. And we know what happens when more time is given, then a very important burning issue is just pushed into the background, and that hasn't yet come up again. But I'm saying here we see women in the forefront resisting. Similarly, I would like to say that if we see the whole struggle, the huge mass movement, I would say, against CEA and NRC and NPR, and we see the lakhs and lakhs of women who actually led that struggle. You know, when we talk about agency, that was a huge example of the agency that women can exert when they, you know, when they decide that they have to, and they're pushed against the wall. But the point I want to make is that whenever, and it was not only at Shaheen Bagh, it was in every single gathering of this kind across the country, in small towns where, you know, a very ordinary, less educated women were participating. But in every one of these huge gatherings, whenever somebody, usually a male, stood up and tried to give a Muslim color to this fight, to this struggle, or tried to sort of, I would say, communalize the issue in a certain way, it was the women who stood up and said, no, you can't speak like this from the stage. We are not going to allow this kind of talk. We are for unity. We are for the unity of our country. And you know, the thing was that suddenly this Constitution of India suddenly became the book that they were standing with in their hands. And it was a huge realization that this is the book that gives us equal citizenship rights, which we are sitting here to fight for. We are not willing to give up. So this, I would like to say, was another huge example of lakhs of less educated, socially, you would say, not a very outgoing Muslim women, but very, very conscious of the need to fight against any kind of communalization or any kind of talk from within their community also, to try and divide this movement on religion or make it into a religious movement. So that's a very inspiring thing. Then I would like to say that in Kerala, when the whole struggle around the Sabrimala entry, of course, now the courts have taken another stand, but when they had allowed that, I must say that, of course, the government of Kerala took a very correct stand, but we cannot forget that thousands and thousands of Edua activists, along with other women, went to each and every home, and they were subjected to ridicule, to abuse, to all kinds of opposition, even from their own family members, from their neighbors. But they persisted, and they went around door to door, house to house, community to community, village to village, talking about equal rights for women, talking about the constitution, and talking about the legal judgment that has been delivered. And along with many, many other organizations and with the help of the government, that incredible women's wall, which said that we are standing here to take forward the social reform movement. We are here to take forward the struggle for equal rights, which we still have not accessed. That inspiring, tremendously inspiring sight was also uh, a big resistance, a big show of resistance, in which, of course, the government and a party played their role, but the women provided the numbers, the women provided the energy, the women provided the courageous campaigning that went into the success of that day. So women are resisting, and women will resist when when they are completely clear, and they are actually pretty clear about the connections between patriarchy, between religious fundamentalism, between Manusmriti and their own oppression, between the need to defend the constitution, defend the laws that give us equality. That realization is there, that realization is growing, and that realization is certainly making more and more resistance also apparent. It's a fact that even today, many of the people who are being targeted by this government are women and young women and women who are activists and who have been opposing the moves of this government. So I would say that these three aspects, along with, of course, the underpinning of the caste system, are responsible in our country for the kind of inhuman exploitation and oppression that women suffer. But resistance is there, and resistance is growing, and resistance must grow, and all of us must play our parts in trying to bring more and more of those who are resisting together. At the moment, there's still fragmentation of the resistance. Some are fighting for wages, some are fighting for their rights as workers, some are fighting for their rights as women, some are fighting for their rights as students, because now the new education policy also, as you know, is going to impact very adversely on the education of women. So there are so many fights, there are so many kinds of resistance that are taking place. It is necessary, I think, for all of us to work to try and bring them together, because we have to focus on what we are fighting against. And what we are fighting against is the combination of class oppression, patriarchy, religious fundamentalism, and subversion of the constitution, along with the underpinnings and reinforcements that all of these gain regularly, all the time, constantly, from the Varnashram Dharma, from the caste system, which is, of course, the greatest expression of inequality. It is birth-based inequality from which there is no escape. And within that framework is the worst kind of gender inequality, that women cannot aspire to any kind of equality within the framework of that Varnashram Dharma, which is, of course, upheld by the Manusmriti. So I think that all the points that have been made today, they're extremely important, and it's really it's wonderful that Hemlata and Mariam could both be here together with their wealth of experience. We only have 3 more minutes, so I don't think maybe we can have, if there's between us, if there's something that we'd like to just raise or something that we just like to underline, I can give you, say, 2 minutes each. So, Comrade Hemlata, is there anything that, Comrade Hemlata, are you still listening? Comrade Hemlata? I don't know, maybe she's got her. Comrade Hemlata, would you like to say something to conclude the session? I think that she's...
Yes.
Yes, would you like to just say something to conclude the session? And then Mariam will say something, and then we'll thank all our listeners.
I think you have summed up, and all the points have been covered also. Just one aspect which I want to tell is that this government is saying that, talking about women's empowerment. And in the name of women's empowerment, they are saying that we have increased the maternity leave to 26 weeks. That is one of the aspects that they are trying to campaign, that we are for the empowerment of women. But actually what they are doing is, as you have told, at the local level, they are organizing women on the basis of these vrats and other religious functions and teaching about the Manusmriti. And on the other hand, actually this amendment, this change in the Maternity Benefit Act will not be of any use. I'm not talking about all the other labor laws which they are trying to suppress the rights of the workers. But even for the women, actually around 94 and more than 94% of women are in the unorganized sector where no law is applicable. But now even the Maternity Benefit Act will be merged in the so-called Social Security Code on Social Security, and all the existing, there is no guarantee that what will be the future. What social security will the workers or the women workers will get through this code, there is no clarity. But what they are doing is submerging, and in this session of the parliament, all these laws, now the code on wages, that has already been approved, and the social security, code on social security, code on industrial relations, and health and occupational health and safety, these three they want to adopt in this parliament. So if these are adopted, then no right will be there either for the male workers or the women workers. So, and particularly they are trying to deceive that they are doing this, which is actually not going to benefit the women workers. So that is just what I wanted to add.
Thank you very much, Comrade Hemlata. That's a very important point. Mariam, are you there? Comrade Mariam? I think that her... Comrade Mariam?
I'm there.
Yeah, can you just, would you like to just say something in conclusion?
Yeah, no, I think it was a very interesting, and you have summed up the entire thing, especially regarding the way the religious fundamentalism is also impacting, and its links with the entire economic policies also. So, in the coming days, as I would just mention, one thing is the way that they're targeting.
Can't hear you now. You're breaking.
I said, so I will put off my video.
Yes.
Yeah. So in the coming days, actually, the government is trying to co-opt women so that they are able to sustain whatever they are trying to do, as you have explained very rightly regarding the dangers on our constitution. And that is why at the ground level, all these things are going on. So I think, yes, in the coming days, we will have to work together, as you rightly put it in the end, along with our struggle against exploitation. We have to take up this struggle against the regressive ideology, because as the working class, talking of the demands against exploitation will also be won only if we are also able to convert that struggle to preserve the secular tradition of our constitution and our country. So this is a very linked struggle, right?
Thank you very much, Mariam. Thank you very much, Comrade Hemlata. And thank you very much, all those who have been listening to us. And I hope that this discussion will continue in different ways, in different places, because it's an important discussion, not only for the women's movement, for the movement for democracy, and for the movement for socialism in our country. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Okay.